beauty marks. You know, Monroe's, Madonna's, Crawford's. Pros and cons by a piercer. That's me. We're going to give you 5 of each, 5 pros, 5 cons. Also, along with that, I'm going to talk about what you should know before getting it done, what the piercing experience is going to be like, healing it, jewelry, living with the piercing, and what happens if you decide you don't want it anymore and you decide to abandon it. Coming up next on Pros and Cons by a Piercer, Season 2, Episode number 18, so you might want to stick around. For those that are new to the channel, first off, welcome to the channel. Hope you're enjoying it. Hope you're learning lots of stuff. I hope the videos are helpful because I like to be helpful. It makes me feel helpful. But you might not know who I am. My name is DaVo. I'm a professional body piercer, and I have been since 1994. I own and operate the Axiom Body Piercing Studio located right here in Des Moines, Iowa, inside Skin Kitchen Tattoo. So, when I talk to you about these things, I talk to you a level of expertise that comes from being in the body piercing industry for well over 26 years, soon to be 27. So the piercing we're going to be talking about today is the beauty mark, also commonly known as a Monroe, a Maryland, a Crawford, a Madonna, based on which side it's on. Usually the Madonna is always on the left, and the other ones are always on the right. It's odd because Monroe never actually had a beauty mark. They painted it on, I believe. So it's just one of those things. Anyway, usually done on the upper lip. It's done straight through. We like to put it, or I personally like to put it above the gum line or below. It can be done below the gum line, but I don't think they look as good. You just want to avoid that area where the gums meet, right there at the gum line. That can cause some issues. Done with a labret stud with a flat back. We don't want to put barbells, rings, or anything else in there because that's probably going to cause a lot of issues. As far as the history of this piercing, lip piercings have been with us for a long time, especially in tribal cultures in Africa, the Pacific Rim, and South America. Really common. We've talked about that before, or I have, I should say. Also, modern version probably came out about the same time as the labret was developed. Late 80s, early 90s. Been with us for the whole time that I've been piercing. All right, time to hit the pros, advantage, the things that we like about this piercing that say, those things that say, hey, I need this. I really, really need this. Starting with number 1, a long history of healing. This is an established piercing. It is not experimental. Chances are you're going to have little or no issues healing this particular piercing out as long as you take care of it properly. Number 2, draws attention and enhances the area. It kind of draws attention to the face, to the lip, the upper lip, to the eyes, to the nose. It can be very subtle, very, very elegant, or it can be very drastic. So it's one of those piercings that really does seem to enhance the area. Number 3, this piercing can be done in groupings, also known as bites. Angel bites would be 2 beauty marks, for example. Things like canine bites, where it's the top and the bottom. Lots of different combinations. It really depends on your anatomy, the shape of your face, the expertise and imagination of your piercer, and your own imagination. But you do a lot of different groupings with this. Number 4, there's a large variety of different types of jewelry that you can put in this. They are barbell-type ends. You can do everything from simple balls all the way up to very, very expensive and very elegant diamonds and precious gems and all kinds of fun stuff. So it really comes down to what you like. You can either do something very subtle or maybe something a little bit more extreme. Number 5, and the last one, this piercing tends to do less damage or be less at a risk for damage as lower lip piercings or labret piercings. And the reason being is there's less movement in your upper lip. You don't move it around as much as you do your lower lip. Especially when you're eating and chewing. You're not moving it quite as much. So less movement, less contact, less risk of issues. Now, I'm not saying there are no issues because there is, and we'll get into that here in a little while. Before I move on to the cons, the disadvantages, I'm going to talk a little bit about the channel. If you like this video, if you like to see more of them, first off, give us a thumbs up. Let us know if you liked it because we like it when you like it. Also, if you want to see more of this, subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you're notified every single time we post something. Now on to the cons and disadvantages. The things that say, no, I don't want this. This is going to be a pain in the ass. Those things, the negatives. The cup's half full or half empty. Yeah, it'd be half empty, right? Number 1, risk to damaging teeth, gums, and the bone structure of your mouth because you have hard metal jewelry, even plastic jewelry. I know everybody goes, I'll put plastic in it. It'll solve all your... No, it doesn't. And it actually adds a whole nother level of problems. Anyway, you have jewelry, hard materials coming in contact with soft organic tissue on a regular basis. It can damage teeth, it can damage gums, it can damage the bone structure of your mouth. And all those things do not grow back or get better. They are, in some cases, if there's enough damage, it's permanent. Number 2, can affect employment. I know I'm going to get 800 comments about, I have a job and I make $80 million a year and I'm a professional and I have this piercing. Yeah, that's great. That's wonderful. You have found a career in a job situation where you can have this particular piercing. The reality is, if you go to a job interview and you're up against somebody that's equally qualified and that person doesn't have a facial piercing and you work with the general public or in a professional capacity and you do, chances are they're going to pick the person who doesn't have the modification. It's just the way life is. I know there are certain careers, certain jobs, certain businesses that actually encourage piercings, but not all of them. So you should always consider that before getting a visible facial piercing. Number 3, the swelling. Any oral piercing is probably going to swell. This one probably not as bad as, say, a tongue piercing, but it can be a hassle. It can be problematic. It can be a pain. It is going to swell, and it's something that you will have to deal with. Change your diet to make sure to reduce it and change what you intake. It's going to make you cut down on things like tobacco or alcohol or things that agitate the piercing until it's healed. Number 4, this piercing closes fairly rapidly. Any oral piercing, if you remove the jewelry for a long period of time, is going to close. With oral piercings, you generate tissue usually a lot faster inside your mouth, so it's not uncommon to have this piercing for a while, then take it out for a couple hours for, to see grandma or grandpa or that uncle that threatens to rip it out with pliers, and suddenly when you get home and you're ready to put it back in, it won't go in. Once again, I'm probably going to get a bunch of people commenting saying they can leave theirs out for 5 years at a time and not have problems getting back in. You are the exception. Your body, for one reason or another, has a tolerance and likes to leave those piercings open. Not a majority of us are not like that. Ours close. Number 5, them pesky ends fall off. Yes, usually the ends are screwed on or threaded, or they're non-threaded, where they're just push pins in there and the tension of the pin holds it in place. They can, especially the threaded jewelry, can come unscrewed and fall off. Even the pins type or threadless type can get caught on things and come out. So it's something that you have to check on a regular basis to ensure that the jewelry doesn't fall out, end up in your mouth when you have a big mouth full of food, which is usually when these things happen, or while you're sleeping. So you can swallow it in your sleep. The other thing is usually when that end comes off, it lands in the most disgusting thing near you. So you do have to kind of be diligent about checking it, and that is a con. Now, with the cons out of the way before we move on to what you should know beforehand or some things you should know, just to let you know, we have a merch store. We have lots of different designs, lots of different colors, shapes, sizes, all that fun stuff, and different types of things. All the way from throw pillows up to T-shirts, hoodies, phone cases, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Link in the description. Also one of those merch bars so you can check them out. And if you do buy something, it makes me smile. And an angel might get his wings. I don't know. Maybe. With that out of the way and that pitch, which was not really that good, let's move on to things you should know before getting or consider before getting this particular piercing. First thing is find the right piercer. You need somebody that's experienced, has done a lot of these, is knowledgeable and willing to share that knowledge, is passionate about what they do, does give a consultation that involves things like the wrist, aftercare instructions, or basic aftercare instructions. evaluate your anatomy, etc. You should have some form of a consultation before you get this piercing. Another thing you should consider is you are more acceptable to STDs during oral sex. So if you're one of those people that's adventurous and switches partners very often, you need to understand that you need to practice safe sex, which means some type of latex barrier. Be safe, people. We want you around. As I mentioned earlier, there is always a risk to enamel erosion, gum erosion, and softening the bones inside your mouth. That doesn't change after it heals. It is something that is present for the whole time you wear the jewelry. The jewelry should be a flat back labret. I don't suggest fishtail labrets, nostril screws, barbells, rings, etc. in this particular piercing. They are just going to cause damage. It's too tight of an area. You will have contact with things you don't want to have contact with. Well, the jewelry will. The jewelry will, at some point, need to be downsized. We have to pierce long to allow for that swelling, but once the piercing is healed, or even before that, you want to go to a shorter barbell to kind of pull the jewelry away from things we don't want to damage. One final thing is you should find out if your piercer supplies aftercare product or what they suggest so you can get it beforehand. Usually with this one, I'm going to suggest a sterile saline solution such as Nelmed's Piercing Aftercare, also Biotine Antiseptic Mouthwash, or an alcohol-free mouthwash, and sea salt in distilled water. And it's a good idea to just get that stuff ahead of time. Now let's talk about the piercing experience itself. The first thing that should happen anytime you walk into a studio is a piercer should pull you aside, look you square in the eye, and start a consultation that's going to cover the risk, what it's going to take to heal it, jewelry options, talk to you about placement, anatomy, all that fun stuff to give you enough knowledge to make an educated decision on whether or not this piercing is right for you or not. They may also discuss any health issues you may have or any medication or controlled or uncontrolled substance you may be on. Usually after the consultation is over, you pick out jewelry, they select that, they figure out what the right size is for you and the right material. In most cases, if they don't talk to you about material, it probably means that they pierce mostly with titanium, which is pretty darn biocompatible. Most people do not have an issue. I would say 99.9% of the general public is never going to have an issue with titanium. If they don't use titanium, they may ask you about nickel allergies or other problems. But if you do know you have that sensitivity to begin with, talk to them about it. Bring it up. Mention it to them. With your jewelry selected and the consultation over, you fill out the waiver. That's going to probably ask you a few health issue questions. It's going to ask you whether or not you're under the influence of any medication, controlled or controlled substance, and basic liability questions or things they may not have thought to ask you. Basically, it's covering their butts. After that, we set up, disinfect the area, and when we get ready to mark it, we may have you do a bunch of funny faces. Now, this isn't a game of Simon Says or the piercer says. What we're trying to determine is how much you move your upper lip when you smile, when you talk, etc., so that we can determine what's going to be the best place and how much travel there's going to be up and down. With the marking or the placement, I usually like to put this above the gum line. It just works better, in my opinion. It has less contact. It needs to be straight through. Now, the piercing, there are some people that do this freehand. Personally, I like forceps. The area is clamped. The needle's injected through, usually from the outside inward. Then a taper pin or guide pin is used to push the needle out. The jewelry is connected onto it, and then it's pushed out from the inside. Now, this part, putting on the end, may take a little while. Sometimes they can be a little tricky. Sometimes they need to use hemostats to hold the post in place or to get it in there. But you just need to be patient. The other thing with this style of piercing where you're using a taper pin or guide pin is sometimes you might see a little bit more bleeding than you would if it was just a straight transfer of jewelry, because the taper pin can be a little thinner than the actual jewelry or the needle. After the fact, you might notice a little bit of bleeding, slight bleeding to moderate, off and on for a few minutes right after it's done. Throbbing, aching, tenderness, that kind of happens sometimes, lasts usually a few minutes. Then it's just going to be tender to the touch. It's not uncommon to see some bruising. The other thing with oral piercings is it is normal for a white ring of tissue to form around the jewelry on the inside. That's scar tissue. It can be white, opaque, or almost clear. It's also uncommon to see kind of this nasty-looking, stringy stuff. It looks like snot hanging off of it. What that is it's lymph discharge, or the discharge that usually hardens on the outside of piercings. On the inside of your mouth, where it's warm and moist, it can't harden. Forms of these strings. Just leave it alone. It'll come off the next time you rinse. Sometimes bruising can occur, usually on the inside. Unless it's really severe, I would not be concerned about it. It usually fades in a few days. Now let's talk about healing. Your work. The piercer already did his job or her job or their job. Now it's your turn to do your job. Healing it. Usually with this one, you're looking at anywhere from a best case scenario, and I mean best case scenario, 8 weeks. But the reality is probably more closer to 12 to 16 weeks, during which time you need to clean it twice a day using sterile saline solution. Basically, you spray it on, let it sit for roughly about 5 to 10 minutes, and then either dab it clean or dry with a clean paper towel or rinse under running water. You can also do compresses where you apply that to a clean paper towel or sterile piece of gauze sponge, apply it to the area for the same period of time. Q-tips are unneeded. Do not use Q-tips. If you leave a little bit of discharge on there, it's perfectly fine. Your body will eventually get rid of it. You don't need to be so diligent about it. Also, don't rotate or move the jewelry. There is absolutely no benefit to that, and it will actually cause problems. For the inside, we do things a little bit differently. For the first couple of weeks, I suggest rinsing with Biotine or some alcohol-free antiseptic mouthwash a couple times a day. Also doing a mixture of 1/8 of a teaspoon per cup of distilled water for the inside. Rinsing at least twice a day, more if it seems like it feels good or makes things feel better. You only really have to do that for about the first 2 weeks. After that, it'd be completely unnecessary. Now, a big part of this, especially at the beginning, is reducing the swelling. You want to cut down your intake of tobacco, alcohol, cannabis, hot and spicy foods, things that are extremely warm in temperature, or anything that may agitate your mouth, including vaping. If it burns, if the sensation's bad, it hurts, don't do it. I don't care if it's organic and it comes from nature. It's not going to do anything but add to the swelling. Stay hydrated, drink lots of cold things. Food-wise, it's not as complicated as, say, healing out or intrusive as a tongue piercing, but it's a good idea to stick with kind of soft foods at first. Things like smoothies, sports shakes, nutritional shakes. Baby food is awesome. Yogurt. Yes, you can eat dairy. That is a misnomer. I know it's all over the internet, but you can eat dairy. Also, things like shakes, cold items, it's your excuse to raid the freezer. Gently soaking in ice chips is a big thing for the first 24 to 28 hours. Sometimes you won't see swelling with these until about the second day. Staying hydrated at night will kind of reduce that because you usually see the worst of the swelling first thing in the morning. Now, I'm not a physician and I don't know your medical history, but if you don't have problems taking over-the-counter anti-inflammatories, you can also do that. The other thing you need to do is practice cross-contamination prevention. That's going to involve things like washing your hands before you handle it. No oral contact, deep mouth kissing, or sexual contact with the piercing for a minimum of 8 weeks or until it's healed. Yep. Can't kiss. Got to do other things. Not even pecking. No pecking. The other thing is keep your bedding, clothing, anything that comes in contact with the piercing, clean it on a regular basis. Do keep things away from it. Keep pets from sleeping in the bed and keep them away from it. Do not submerge the piercing in bodies of water you cannot control the quality of, which is pretty much everything but your own clean bathtub. No swimming. Sorry. The beach is closed. The other thing is keep cosmetics and hairspray and all that sort of stuff away from it. If we are still in the pandemic and you are wearing a mask, change them on a regular basis. Also be very cautious when you remove them. Now, as I mentioned, swelling will happen with this one. It is very common for the first 3 to 5 days. If it lasts longer than that or starts to exceed the length of the post, see your piercer immediately for a longer post or to try to figure out what exactly is going on with you. Now, one other thing that is common with these is what's called nesting, and that's where the disc in the back will kind of sink into the tissue. That is perfectly fine. It's actually going to help keep that jewelry away from your teeth. It's a good thing, and it makes it more comfortable. The only time you should be concerned is if it seems like the tissue is starting to grow over the area. If that does happen, do see your piercer as soon as possible. Now, if you are getting it caught on things, if it is bumping into your gums constantly, if it is causing pain and frustration, See your piercer and have it downsized as soon as possible. Even if it doesn't do any of those things and you get to the end of your healing period, downsize the jewelry. The only reason we have longer jewelry in there is to allow for the swelling. After the swelling's done, there's no reason to have that jewelry in there other than to cause damage and be a pain in the ass. Or the mouth in this case. Always check the tightness of the ball and make sure that it is seated correctly on there because, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes they fall off on their own, and it's usually the worst time for them to do that. Now let's talk about jewelry. First off, downsize, 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 and then when you're done, downsize. It's a big thing. It will make your life a heck of a lot easier, and it will reduce the risk of problems. It is really common for people to get this piercing and be wearing the same jewelry 5 years later and can't figure out why their gums are receding at this point. The jewelry should be kept in at all times. Don't remove it and leave it out for an extended period of time. You should only take it out to replace it. As I mentioned earlier, they can close very rapidly on certain individuals. You don't know until you take the jewelry out, and why risk it? Why? Jewelry should always be a flat back, labret stud. And you shouldn't put barbells in their rings or anything else because they're going to increase the amount of contact that they're going to have because they have a higher profile. Now let's talk about living with the piercing. First off and foremost, as I already mentioned about 8 times, don't take the jewelry out. Leave the jewelry in. If you like the piercing, leave something in it. Monitor your teeth, your gums, the bone structure of your mouth. If you start to encounter pain or you start to notice damage, remove the jewelry and abandon the piercing as soon as possible. It is not going to get better. Sorry. Avoid pressure and trauma on the piercing area. Don't get punched in the mouth. Don't get smacked in the mouth. Don't run your mouth into doors. I don't know why you would do that. But don't sleep on it. Also be cautious of headgear or anything that you put on the area that it doesn't cause a lot of strain or abuse to the piercing. And one last thing, abandoning the piercing. Let's say you just got sick of the thing or you're having that damage issue. Now, if it's during the healing process, remove it and keep an eye on it. You should treat it like any other cut or wound that you may have on your body. If there's any signs of infection, seek medical attention. Now, if it's healthy and you healed it out and everything's great and wonderful and glorious, but you're just tired of it, take the jewelry out. It will slowly begin to close, usually closing first in the center and then filling in outward. That's why piercings that have been abandoned often look like they're open. You'll be stuck with a slightly larger than the jewelry hole or indentation scar that should fade over time like any other scar. Last thing is occasionally dried skin cells and sebum oil will collect in the piercing. This stuff can stink. Has a very distinct odor to it. When you squeeze it, it comes out. It's kind of white and cream cheesy. It's perfectly normal. It's not something you have to worry about. It doesn't mean it's infected. It doesn't mean that you've got some kind of hoof and mouth disease. It's perfectly fine. Don't worry about it. Cleaning the area with some warm water and soap is about the only thing you would need to do. That's all I have to say on beauty marks and whatever you would like to call them. Till next time, here's hoping all your piercings heal with ease and without a single issue. And if you're in the Des Moines, Iowa area, I hope to see you for your body piercing needs in the future. Have a good day, everybody. Take care. Take care of your piercings, and we'll see you in that next video we do.